There have been 5 coups d'etat. The last one was in 2013, when a rebel coalition known as the Seleka seized power. The Seleka was incapable of bringing any kind of security to the country and clung on for just over a year. Now divided and split, they've nonetheless maintained their ability to cause nuisance, and they still dream of taking power. France 24 reporters James Andre and Anthony Fouchard have been to the Seleka stronghold of Ndele, in the northeast of the Central African Republic. They've had a unique insight into what amounts to a parallel state where the guns speak louder than any words.
The sound of army boots and songs ring out on the streets of Ndele. Every morning, FPRC militiamen run across the city centre to train and remind everyone who's in charge. Noureddin Adam and Abdoulaye Sen, 2 of the main commanders of the ex-Seleka, respectively political and military heads of the FPRC, the Popular Front for the Renaissance of the Central African Republic. 80% of the Central African Republic is beyond the control of the state. The FPRC, an armed group with a Muslim majority, has complete control over the entire north of the country, an area rich with natural resources on the borders with Chad and Sudan. Ndele is Abdoulaye Sen's stronghold, a small town of 13,000 inhabitants, lost in the bush, 650 kilometers from Bangui, the capital. There are no paved roads to come here. To go to Bangui, one has to travel for several days on dirt tracks or be able to afford the UN flights that rotate twice a week. Airplanes that Abdoulaye Sen, the master of Ndele, no longer has the right to board. He's been placed on international sanction lists. The FPRC military leader is wanted by the Central African Republic for abuses committed by his troops in 2015. He was one of the commanders of the Seleka rebels' bloody descent on Bangui in 2013, which plunged the country into chaos and led to a coup d'etat against former president François Bozizé.
Bonjour, Excellences, tous les officiers sont rendus pour vous rendre les honneurs. Devant vous, le colonel Mohamed Van Dijk.
Abdoulaye Sen then became minister in Michel Djotodia's Seleka government, until it was removed under international pressure in 2014.
The problem is real. We've been here for 4 years. It's been 4 years since we retreated here because we respected the international community who told us, listen, you need to leave because there have been security issues. They said it would take 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we will bring security back to the Central African Republic. It's been 4 years of waiting with all the heavily armed men you see here. We are here and we are waiting. The government and the President of the Republic neither have the strength nor the means nor the right policy to rally the people. It is unacceptable. We cannot accept that everyday people die in the Central African Republic.
Deaths that stir up hatred between communities. On the 8th of April 2018, UN peacekeepers launched Operation Sekula to arrest Force, the leader of a local militia operating at Kilometer 5, a predominantly Muslim neighborhood in Bangui. The operation turned into a complete fiasco. The UN troops were shot at and retaliated. 20 people were killed in the neighborhood and 11 peacekeepers were injured. On the 11th of April, the population of Kilometer 5 laid 17 dead bodies in front of the UN headquarters in Bangui, and Abdoulaye Sen started to mass his forces preparing to attack the capital. Today, his fighters are still positioned.
It's the international community, it's MINUSCA, it's the blue helmets who have gone in to kill these people. This community is mine. I'm part of this community, a community that is a minority here in the CAR. In any country, if there is a problem, minorities are protected. MINUSCA does the opposite.
MINUSCA is the UN peacekeeping force in the Central African Republic. Its 13,000 men are deployed since 2014. In Ndele, it's represented by a unit of Pakistani peacekeepers that are barely tolerated by the rebels. They patrol the city with tanks like this one. In all, they have 3. Captain Zohaib is in charge. The main challenges are to be accepted by a weary population and overcome the language barrier.
Sometimes honestly, I use the translator, language translator, in my mobile phone. But since it's not around, so I know some words, some things to say, and I know the meanings too, and I communicate them like, what's your name? How are you? How's the day been?
MINUSCA has a fort in the city center. From this elevated position, they observe the comings and goings of the FPRC units, without really being able to intervene. Their mandate is not to disarm them. The Blue Helmets are outgunned and outnumbered. They don't have the firepower to impose anything on the rebels. All they can do is negotiate, often using their shared faith.
If they're doing something wrong, we observe that they're doing this wrong, they're doing injustice or any such sort of thing. We advise them, we tell them not to do it because, we try to tell them about their own religion, that no, this is not in your religion, you're not supposed to do this. Sometimes, yeah, they agree. Sometimes they quit things like that.
Like the FPRC fighters, the population of Ndele is predominantly Muslim. It is the month of Ramadan. After the prayer, many of the faithful meet in front of the meshwi stalls of the local market to break the fast. FPRC militiamen, armed to the teeth, patrol, monitor and ensure that calm prevails. No national security forces operate in Ndele, neither police nor gendarmerie, let alone the FACA, the Central African Army.
We have been abandoned by the state. There is no road, no health, no school. We suffer. It's as if we are not citizens of the Central African Republic. Currently, as you can see, there are FPRC fighters who ensure security, and we feel safe.
There is also a Christian community in town. Here, scouts can parade on Ndele's main street without being worried. An astonishing scene in a country where religion has been instrumentalized and where violence is exercised on a confessional basis.
There are no religious problems here in the city of Ndele. We hear about the things that are happening elsewhere in Bambari province and all that, but here there are no serious problems. No one prevents Christians from praying here.
Is that thanks to the FPRC?
Well, yes. I guess you could say that it is thanks to the FPRC.
According to the vicar, leaving Christians in peace is part of the armed group's strategy.
Very often, elsewhere, it's the armed groups that are responsible for these problems. These incidents between Christians and Muslims. But here, they are the ones in charge. And they don't want attacks on Christians to be possible.
There is little tension between Christians and Muslims in Delhi. But nonetheless, this is a city run by armed men. The atmosphere is feverish in the playground at Ndoka School. It's graduation day. These teachers are gathered to decide which children will be handed their primary education certificate. They are civil servants paid by the Education Ministry. The FPRC does not have the means to manage the school system and lets them work. On the other hand, the presence of the armed group in the city has a strong influence on the pupils.
When they see them running in the morning and singing in full military attire, some kids are tempted. And lately, when they went down towards Bangui, a lot of high school students dropped out of classes to follow them.
The teachers are ready to hand down their verdict.
Les admis dont les noms se suivent. Mapuka Stanislas.
In turn, each school principal calls his 10 best pupils. The teacher's task is simple with these good students, but things will be more difficult with those who have failed.
Most of the students have their parents in this armed group. Most of the children who come to school are the sons and daughters of these armed men. It's difficult, especially when we try to correct the children. They say they will talk to a colonel, a general. We are afraid. The teachers are afraid of correcting them. They threaten us. Yes, the last time the supervisor received a death threat, we found an inscription on the wall. It read, "You have 2 days left before we shoot you with a rocket."
And in Delhi, the FPRC wants to demonstrate that it can be more than just an armed group. Abdoulaye Hissène has recreated a gendarmerie force that is supposed to protect and serve the population.
Commandant de compagnie, Mohamed Augustin Saboun. En vos ordres, Excellence. Commandant de brigade adjoint Yacoub Ibrahim. En vos ordres, Excellence.
We are taking responsibility. We're even managing the tasks of the state. It was necessary to set up a gendarmerie brigade in order to handle the population. There are cases of robbery and theft and some small problems that need solving.
The gendarmes have very little means. They have a single prison cell for police custody, which officially cannot exceed 48 hours. The crimes are recorded on simple notebooks. There is no proper justice system. Once custody is over, customary law applies. Traditional authority is embodied by the Sultan Mayor of Delhi, a title handed down from father to son. He acts as a judge and settles disputes. Today he is on the outskirts of Delhi, flanked by a sub-prefect, one of the few officials tolerated by the FPRC. International NGOs have decided to build an extension to a school located between two villages. Workers have been recruited from each of them, but there are tensions.
We just talk to them. They agree on the work, the distribution of activities, the workforce and other.
Mediation is done on the building site. Each side presents its arguments, and the Sultan finds a solution. The sub-prefect is one of 3 officials that are supposed to represent the authority of the Central African state in the region. But he is alone and has no office and no car.
There's a shortage of state services. We're 3. The sub-prefect of Dele, but he's also on mission in Bangui. The prefect himself is on mission, and they will be back soon. We do our best with what we have. We're here to prove that the state's authority is coming back gradually, and the other services can come back as well, and so on.
Asked about the FPRC, which collects taxes in place of the state, the sub-prefect appears ill at ease.
That I don't know for sure, but maybe.
Wait, I'll answer them. About the taxes you mention, it's no secret to anyone. He represents the state. He is not a tax or customs agent. And since there is not a customs officer, there is no tax agent. Certainly, there is this replacement. That's right. They levy the tax, they collect money. Here the state only exists through the prefect, the mayor and sub-prefect. But here there is nothing, not even a justice system, no court, no prosecutor. It's true, we have a serious problem.
Ndele Central Market is the largest in the region. It's a commercial hub on the track to Chad and Sudan. In addition to established traders, hundreds of women come here every day from their village to sell their crops and buy food. In the absence of the state, the FPRC has started collecting taxes to finance its activities. The tax office is installed in the abandoned sub-prefecture building.
My role is to work for the tax department. These are contributory taxes only, for the security of the shops that are in the central market of Ndele.
Ali Adam Daoud, grocer at the market, has come to pay the balance of his taxes. In all, for this year, he will have paid 15,000 CFA francs, about 22 euros, to the rebels, and nothing to the Central African state. Merchants who do not have an actual store are not taxed. For those who have, the tax is determined empirically by one of the 6 tax agents, according to the perceived value of their business.
We call it a contribution. It's not a tax as such. It's a voluntary contribution. It's a flat tax. If it is 30,000 francs, for example, the trader can pay in 3 installments, 10,000 francs, sometimes 5,000 per month until he finishes in 5 or 6 months.
Shopkeepers who pay feel safe. They can actually leave their goods in their stores at night and sleep at home. That's unusual in CAR.
Well, before I used to pay 60,000 francs a year to the government. But now the FPRC is in charge, they don't tax as much. They just take a package of 8,000 francs a year. 8,000.
8,000 CFA francs, about 12 euros, a symbolic sum that helps impose the idea of an FPRC tax without making the shopkeepers angry. Trucks passing through Ndele, often loaded with goods from Chad and Sudan, are more heavily taxed. FPRC fighters board them at the checkpoint that controls the entrance of their territory and escort them to the tax office. There, they have to pay about 200,000 CFA francs. That's 350 euros, a fortune. Collecting taxes is a strong symbol for anyone setting up a proto-state. But it is far from being the only income source for the armed group. Northern CAR is full of untapped resources: oil, gold, and diamonds. Ndao mine is located 42 kilometers from Ndele. It is a 3-hour ride in the bush. The track is narrow and rugged, impassable by car. These motorcycles commute daily between Ndao and Ndele, and technical problems are common. The FPRC monitors this track very closely. Bandits know that all the diamonds from the mine are transported this way. Have we arrived?
We've arrived. We're going to see the village chief.
Okay.
Hundreds of miners come to work here several days at a time. An entire village has grown around the mine.
Here, to find diamonds, all you have to do is dig. Before, the stones were dug out one after the other. There were hundreds of workers, but now there's not enough money to work properly.
The mine extends as far as the eye can see. Hundreds of holes have been excavated with shovels. All are several meters in depth. There are no machines on the site. It is midday, the temperature is 40 degrees, and it is Ramadan. Almost no one is working.
It's too hard, there's too much suffering. It's not good. In other mines, they have machines, but here we have to dig with shovels. It's not good.
Activity is slow also because of international sanctions. The collectors who finance the mining and recover the stones no longer want to invest here. The export of diamonds from the north of the country has been strictly banned since 2013. But there is trafficking. According to the UN, $24 million worth of diamonds have been smuggled out of the Central African Republic in the first 18 months that followed the imposition of sanctions. Diamonds are a major source of funding for the FPRC, which controls a score of mines like this one. Central African diamonds are amongst the world's purest. According to experts, 39 million carats are still waiting to be extracted in the country. Enough to whet the appetite of foreign actors. After the Chinese, who extracted the region's oil until 2017, the Russians are starting to make their move. This amateur footage, dated 11th of May 2018, shows an 18-truck convoy. On board, 55 Russia-linked paramilitaries have come to present a gift to the FPRC, a field hospital. The Russians have been invited very officially by President Touadéra's government to train and equip Central African soldiers down south. Clearly, the Russians are also trying to make contact with the rebels. Abdoulaye Sen decided to stop and search the convoy, which, in addition to the medical equipment, contained weapons.
Vous avez parlé de troupes civiles, pas militaires. Vous avez vos armes de protection, ok. Mais le reste, tout ce qui est des troupes épées militaires, les tenues, les chargeurs, tout ça, c'est pas dans les conventions, c'est pas dans notre entente. On s'est entendu à ce que vous êtes tel et puis tel. Il n'y a pas d'effet militaire. Non. L'effet militaire, ça traverse comme là-bas. On finit le travail, après on va discuter. Non, c'est bon.
After the search, the trucks continued on their way to Bria, a rebel-held area where the field hospital was set up. This Russian presence worries FPRC leaders.
I think there is also provocation on behalf of the government when they say that they will use the Russians against us. There was indeed a phone call to the coordination to tell us, we will eliminate you. You have become kanda, meatballs. So they say they're going to crush all of us and make us into meatballs to eat.
We are not afraid of the Russians. If the Russians cross our path to fight, we're ready.
Noureddin Adam's chief of staff is concerned, and so is the organization's political leader.
The general perceives the presence of the Russians as a provocation, because from the start, we have considered the Russians to be our enemies. When they arrived with their weapons, we heard on the radio Central African people shouting, "It's over for you." We can stop them, of course, but seriously, we have to consider the sheer power of the Russians compared to our own.
A new player, at a time when African Union-sponsored mediation with the government is underway.
No, we are not at war. We are in a process that the African Union has already put in place. We also submitted our recommendations. We're only waiting for the finalization of the African Union process.
Abdoulaye Hissène, the warlord, returns to the FPRC's main military base.
Avant, c'était base de forces armées centrales PACA. Maintenant, c'est nous qui occupons.
In the pickups, his men are restless.
We are ready. We are committed.
We're ready in 15 days.
No.
Okay.
We will not stop fighting before we achieve victory. One day we will be in Bangui.
The FPRC claims to have 12,000 fighters, an unverifiable figure. On the other hand, its ability to destabilize the CAR is long proven.
Our men are in Bangui. They're simply waiting for the green light. That's all there is to it. I think I have 872 men at the ready.
We drop it here and then boom. It's going to explode. It can go 1,000 kilometers. See, like that, directly to PK-12. And then directly to the presidential palace. We will go and take Bangui. We're ready to go to Bangui with this.
These fighters dream of marching on Bangui just as they did back in 2013. But the situation on the ground has changed. MINUSCA peacekeepers and French fighter jets are ready to stop them. In the north, the FPRC's parallel state appears impossible to uproot. The only solution seems to be a political deal that avoids both a partition of the country and a bloodbath.
And our thanks again to James Andre and Anthony Fouchard for their report. See it again on our website, france24.com. This is Reporters Plus on France 24. Stay with us.
Hello? Una.
Civil war, warlords, famine, pirates. All images most commonly associated with Somalia in people's minds. The country, once labeled the Switzerland of Africa, has suffered a steady and tragic decline for decades. But beneath the prolonged suffering and chaos is a land rich in history and heritage, and a people struggling to maintain a semblance of normality in the absence of a state. In the Horn of Africa, Somalia is the continent's most easterly country. It has the longest coastline in mainland Africa, stretching more than 3,000 kilometers along the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Aden, and the Red Sea. Its location turned Somalia into a strategically important trading center in the ancient world. But the history of Somalia dates back much further, to some of the earliest human settlements in the world. These cave images of a life of herding in the Lasgil wall paintings in northwestern Somalia are estimated to date back between 3,000 and 6,000 years BCE. They're the first chapter in Somalia's now largely forgotten story.
We're just known for being skinny and pirates. We're not known for having, a strong history, a strong culture. We're not known for the things that we know ourselves about. They're probably not even known by Somalis. You can walk around here and see the history of just this town itself. We have a very, very deep and long history that, even Somalis are unaware of. And that's a shame, I think.
If you look at the orange, and you say, well, this has sort of blemishes, okay? So it might not taste too well, so you can throw it away. But if you actually take the husk out, and you look, there are no blemishes inside, and it's sweet and juicy, okay? And so if you look at what has happened to the Somali people, the tragedy that has befallen them in the last 25 years or so, so these people are sort of a rubbish, okay? But if you go to Mogadishu, if you go to Hargeisa, if you go to Garawa, if you go to Kismaya, and you go to schools that ordinary people have put together, those young and women in those schools are more eager to learn than my students here at the University of Minnesota.
Somalia is emerging from a very long, difficult period, and we are now moving away from the chaos, instability, extremism, piracy to an era of peaceful and development.
Around 12 million Somalis, most of them herders, farmers, and fishermen, live in the country's 600,000 square kilometers. Despite being a member of the Arab League, Somalia's main language is Somali. The only Arabic speakers are people who've studied the language or lived in Arab countries.
It always makes me very cross when I hear some official somewhere saying Syria is the next Somalia, or Libya is the next Somalia, or Aleppo is Mogadishu. You hear that. Somalia has become a catchword for the most disastrous, chaotic, violent, terrible state.
With the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, Somalia's strategic location became even more significant. Being at the intersection of Africa and Asia did not go unnoticed in the West. In 1884, the United States and 13 European countries met in Berlin, their aim to divide the African continent between them. They divided what we know as Somalia into 3 provinces, each ruled by a different European country. British Somalia, Italian Somalia, and French Somalia. The mainly Somali region of Ogaden was taken by the Ethiopian Empire and the NFD by Kenya.
The incredible thing about Somalia is that if you go way back in its history, it's always been either fought over or had foreign powers intervening in some way.
Both British and Italian Somalia gained independence in 1960. French Somalia voted to remain under French rule, despite accusations of ballot rigging, but later voted firmly for independence in 1977 and became Djibouti. The former British and Italian territories immediately united, forming Greater Somalia on the 1st of January 1960. Somalis elected Adam Abdullah Othman as the first president of the united country. He ruled for 7 years and was succeeded after a free and peaceful election by Abdel Rashid Ali Sharmarka. This was when Somalia's peace and stability earned it the nickname the Switzerland of Africa. However, corruption was rife and frustration began to mount. Sharmarka ruled for 2 years, but he was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards on the 15th of October, 1969, and succeeded by Prime Minister Mukhtar Mohammed Hussein. He ruled for just 6 days before being overthrown in a military coup. It was led by General Siad Barre, who would be the dominant figure in Somalia for the next 2 decades. Somalia's experiment in democracy was over. The rifle, not the ballot box, would now govern the country. Barre dissolved parliament, suspended the constitution, banned political parties, arrested politicians, and limited press freedom.
We had only accepted the...
And then from that on, there was a downward trend in Somalia, everything, up to the end, up to the disintegration. And every time things were going down, the military regime was becoming more brutal and more dictator.
So people were arrested, properties were confiscated without compensation. Any ship that brings material to Berbera, the materials on that ship were confiscated by the Siad Barre regime with no compensation. So things were getting worse and worse.
Barre's government was supported by the 2 superpowers of the day, the United States and the Soviet Union. It built the country's infrastructure and radically improved literacy. But in 1977, Barre made a move to take the Ogaden region, which was majority Somali, from his neighbor, Ethiopia.
I think what the Ogaden War was about was actually staking a claim to a more realistic border which did not comply with the colonial border. The colonial border was the line across the map. The real border was what the Somalis tried to establish. And of course, you remember, it was a very strange war because Siad Barre pretended that it was not a war being fought by the Somali army, but was being fought by the Western Somali Liberation Front, which didn't really exist at all. I mean, we went out to try and find the Western Somali Liberation Front, and we discovered, of course, that their tanks, their armored cars, were all Somali military vehicles with just a bit of paint on them saying WSLF. So the whole thing was a fiction. Of course, what was a fact was that the Somalis wanted their territory, wanted what was naturally, organically Somalia. But Siad Barre did not want to be seen to be fighting for that himself.
Jon Snow, News at 10, Jig Jigger.
However, the Somali army was forced to withdraw when the Soviet Union sided with Ethiopia in the conflict.
The army came back, demoralized, defeated, after they felt they were victorious. That was when the Somalis' nationalism became something of the past. Clans came up, warlords came up, other factions came up, religious groups came up.
Opposition to the military government increased. Encouraged by Ethiopia, tribes in the north rejected Barre's dictatorship. He turned his rockets and warplanes on them and attacked Hargeisa, the capital of former British Somalia, in May 1988, killing thousands of northern Somalis. In 1991, the southern and northern tribes, armed by Ethiopia, moved to overthrow Barre. The general's grip on power had weakened, and his allies had abandoned him.
By the time the government fell at the end in 1991, neither the Soviet Union nor the United States was backing Siad Barre. They both had given up on him.
Even if Siad Barre tried over those decades of rule to ban the clan, what happened to Siad Barre was that he eventually actually used clan politics to try to dominate the whole territory, and he marginalized some clans and promoted others. So the way in which he eventually fell from power was clans rose up against him and kicked him out.
Former British Somalia declared its independence from Greater Somalia. It calls itself the Republic of Somaliland, but has little international recognition even today. The rest, what had been Italian Somalia, became the Federal Republic of Somalia. Siad Barre was gone. Ali Mahdi became temporary president, but was opposed by General Muhammad Farah Hadid. The two fought for 4 months. A ceasefire was agreed, but the civil war continues today.
If Siad Barre was to leave power 2 years earlier and said, now Somalis, you have to organize new elections and I will be happy to leave, none of this would have happened. But when he brutalized different groups of people in different regions of the country, people were just literally mindlessly wants to get rid of him. But they never thought of what was going to come. And the leaders who were leading them against Siad Barre were singing the music of sectarianism rather than sort of the music of commonality and brotherhood.
I think most people in the international community believe that Somalia became a failed state in 1991 with the collapse of the Siad Barre government, which had been in power since 1969. And many governments have failed around the world. That is not unique. However, in this case, there was no replacement government.
I usually use the word collapsed state rather than a failed state, in large measure because it's the government that has collapsed rather than the state of affairs for the whole country. This is a country at one point that was the best democratic country in Africa. Now it has become, in a sense, the worst because there has been no government in place for 25 years. And so the absence of government means there are no public schools, there are no public security services, there are no public health facilities, there are no public sort of environmental protection, there are no infrastructure that's being built by the state. So the absence of the state means that the government has collapsed, but society is trying to make a life in the midst of that madness.
Because of the nature of the Somali people
And because the fact that they have been a nation prior to the formation of the state, the modern state system has collapsed. But the nation itself did not collapse. And the people have managed to an extent that it has been documented, it has been talked about, it has been elaborated. The case that Somalia is teaching well, presumably, that they can live without a state. So I think they have shown something totally different than what was expected to come out.
Maybe Somalia has had a failed political system, failed government, but it's not a failed society. So many things work in Somalia better than they do in lots of other countries. They have one of the most cheap and efficient telecommunication systems in the world. Their remittance system is incredible. You can pay mobile payments in Somalia that you can't do here. You can go to get your petrol, you just pay by your phone. It's very sophisticated and successful in lots of ways. So I think it's wrong to call it a failed state.
To have a state is important because now anybody can come to the country, whatever name they come, whether they are coming for Operation Restore Hope, whether they are coming for Amazon Africans looking for the peace, and whichever name they come in. The good thing about the state is state controls the security of the country. But the good thing about being a Somali is that despite all that, they have exhibited remarkable resilience and work and dynamics.
The civil war caused widespread famine. The UN sent humanitarian aid, but both the famine and the civil war dragged on. Somalia was unable to prevent foreign forces entering the conflict.
Imagine 7,000 tons of food aid literally bursting out of a warehouse on a dock in Mogadishu, while Somalis starve less than a kilometer away because relief workers cannot run the gauntlet of armed gangs roving the city. Confronted with these conditions, relief groups called for outside troops to provide security so they could feed people. It's now clear that military support is necessary to ensure the safe delivery of the food Somalis need to survive.
So in December 1992, the US launched a military operation on the pretext of protecting the UN humanitarian effort. In 1993, US forces tried to capture self-proclaimed President Adid, resulting in the Battle of Mogadishu. But the operation failed. 2 American helicopters were shot down and their crews dragged through the streets. Around 1,000 Somalis and 18 Americans were killed in the violence.
This past weekend, we all reacted with anger and horror as an armed Somali gang desecrated the bodies of our American soldiers and displayed a captured American pilot. All of them soldiers who were taking part in an international effort to end the starvation of the Somali people themselves. These tragic events raise hard questions about our effort in Somalia. When will our people come home?
American troops had withdrawn from Somalia by March 1994. Fighting continued between the rival Somali militias as they splintered into more and more different factions. In 2004, a US-backed transitional government was formed. But it ran into opposition from the Islamic Courts Union, the ICU. This was a group of Sharia courts that united to form a rival government. It made major gains in 2006, taking control of almost the entire south of the country, including the capital, Mogadishu. It also reopened the air and seaports after over a decade. Ethiopia intervened to prop up the transitional government. It managed to roll back the Islamic Courts Union and finally retook Mogadishu in December 2006. The ICU was weakened and forced to the south. In 2007, the UN deployed a combined African Union peacekeeping force called AMISOM. Ethiopia sent in its own troops, along with those of the African Union. But AMISOM's reputation suffered when Human Rights Watch accused it of several abuses, including sexual assault and civilian killings. This reinforced the view of many Somalis that AMISOM was an invading force, an occupation by stealth. They also saw Ethiopia as funding clans and sub-clans to sow division and prolong the conflict. As the ICU became marginalized, a more radical splinter group emerged, Al-Shabaab. Prepared to use violence, it took control of vast swathes of the south of Somalia.
ilaahay isku xiran oo ilaahay rumaysan oo kitaabkiisa isugu imaanay marka qofka muslimka waa wax laga rabo gaar ahaan laakiin amalka maanta aan ku jirno annaga gurigeenaba nologu yimi oo waa nalagu soo duulay annagoon idna aadin maanta aniga kuma duulin Ethiopia kuma duulin aniga Kenya kuma duulin aniga waxaan joogaa masqat raasi meeshaan ku dhashay baa joogaa oo la igu imaanaya oo la igu dulminaya marxaladda tan aniga waxaan iska difaacaya oo aan iska celinaya cadow igu soo duulay oo banaanka iga.
The areas under Al-Shabaab control became more stable. But in 2011, a foreign power intervened again, this time Kenya. More than half a century on from independence, Somalia was once again at the mercy of a foreign army. Coming up in part 2, Somalis turn to piracy to protect their rich waters from illegal fishing.
A group of youngsters in a little village in Puntland, fed up with the activities of these illegal fishing companies, boarded a ship one day to protest. And they were told, what do you need to go away? They were given money. That was how it began.
When Somalia freed itself from colonial rule in 1960, its future seemed bright. It was peaceful and stable, had free and fair elections, and its geographical position in the world was commercially important. But when Siad Barre's 22-year dictatorship ended in 1991, the country was plunged into an interminable civil war. A UN peacekeeping force called AMISOM was deployed, but it was accused of abusing its powers, and its reputation plummeted. The presence of foreign forces was a problem for many Somalis, and the constant conflict also badly affected the economy.
Example, cabbage iyo tamaandhada. Annagoo imika intan halkan kan hore mid baa iga baxday halkan imika aan joogno dhinaceeda yaa iga baxday anigoo le maanta dhilkii fakhrigaa tuuraysa wada intani ku baxday ayaa marka 10kii saxarood hore 100,000 layga siistay ayaa waxa la soo rogay intaasoo kamiyo oo baabuuro laga keenay Ethiopia ayaa la keenay ya 40 bay ku dhacay ya ilaa markii dambe daadin baa ay gaadho suuqa lagu daadiyo la yiri waa liibsan waayba marka doraado kala geyso maanta tu cusub timaado taadi casaaday cidimadiisu hadaba suuqyada caynkaas ay dilayaan meesha way ku jiraan ya dalkii oo dhaqaale lahayn iyo dawladii oo la ictiraafsanayn oo hay'adaha yar wax la soo mariyo mooyaane aanay jirinna iyaduna way jirtaa kolka duruufaha caynkaas ayaa nagu xeeran.
The food supplied by aid agencies was sometimes unfit for human consumption. Some saw the West as simply offloading excess produce rather than providing genuine help. But Somali fishermen also had problems. Foreign vessels began encroaching on their waters, leading to an even more dangerous development: piracy.
ha ahaatee iskaashatooyinka dhibaatooyinkoodu ma yara mar dhexe oo burburkii markii uu dhacay kadib waxaa dhacday markii dadka kalluumaysatada ay baddii ay ku nabadgeli waayeen oo maraakiib shisheeye oo kalluumaysi sharci darraa baddeenna ku haya ay qalabkii kalluumaysiga ay baabi'iyeen oo doonyihii ay jejebiyeen oo dadkii ay biyo kuleel ay ku shubeen waxay khasab ku noqotay dadka kalluumaysatada inay iska difaacaan maraakiibtaas sharci darrada ku kalluumaysanaysa markeedii ugu horreysay maraakiibta kalluumaysiga la qabtay dad oo gadooday oo shabaagtoodii la baabi'iyey oo maslaxaddoodii badda la burburiyey ayaa waxay goosteen inay ka dagaalamaan oo ay ka dhiidhiyaan markaasna waxaa ka dhalatay burcadbadeednimadii aa ka dhalatay meesha ugu horreysay burcadbadeednimo ay ka dhalatay waxay ahaaday dhinaca badda cas.
This was a once a bustling location. It's fantastic. It all started for me when I went to a region in Somaliland called Sanag, and a little village, a little fishing village on the coast where my family came from. The first time I went there, it was wonderful, obviously. I only saw what people wanted me to see. But as I started to go there on a regular basis annually, I noticed that the fishermen and their activity was getting less and less and less and less. And I noticed at the same time that in the far horizon, there would be these big foreign boats, motherships, with their little tenders crawling around the sea, scooping up all the fish. The activity of the Somalilanders getting less and less easy. And at the same time, what was happening was the growth of piracy on the Somali coast. And that was the headline news, the piracy, the Somali pirates. A group of youngsters in a little village in Puntland, and they fed up with the activities of these illegal fishing companies, boarded a ship one day to protest, and they were told, what do you need to go away? They were given money. That was how it began. And of course it then escalated into a proper long-term business with many people benefiting from.
ay ku faafto wadankii iyo adduun weynaha ay ku faafto dhibaatadii ay ka dhalatay kalluumaysiga sharci darrada markeedii hore adduunkaas soo gurmaday maraakiib oo dagaala la keenay oo lagula difaacidda ay difaacayeen burcadbadeednimada difaacina ahayd inay maraakiibtooda ay difaacanayaan hadda ay ku difaacanayaan baddeenna inay ka xaalufiyaan kalluunka إلى الآن واسعتها أرنتاس وكجران مراكب شرع الدردة بدأ وكجران.
International community talks about Somali pirates. There are 4 kinds of pirates if you study this. And the most costly pirates are not the Somalis who hijack the ships, are the Italians, the Spaniards, the Belgians, the sort of Chinese, the Indians, the Tanzanians, the Egyptians, and everybody else who is looting the Somali waters. And guess how much they take away every year in free fish? $500 million every year. And so the country is big enough and rich enough to be able to provide a decent livelihood for all of its citizens if it's managed properly. But the international community, neighbors, don't want Somalia to stand on its toes. They want Somalis to be needy and to be beggars.
dhibaatooyin kale oo hadda maanta aan sheeganayno oo aan ahayn in dhibaatada iska ku badan tahay xeebihii oo aadan meesha rabto u kalluumaysan karin midii aan markaas u dhadhoweyn oo amnigeeda iyo aan islahayn waxaad la imaadaan khayraadka keensataan waa idinku soconaya ama waxtar baa ku helaysaan yacni ayadan xoogaa dhibaatooyin noocaan ah ka jira
dhibaatadii haysay dadkii kalluumaysatada hobyo uga soo cararay dhibaatada kalluumaysiga lagu haayo oo sida burcad badannimada iyo maraakiibtan shisheeye ay maxay ahaato soo miciin bideen gobolkan banaadir iyo magaalada muqdisho agagaarkeeda inay macnaha ka kalluumaystaan isla dhibaatadii ay ka soo carareen misna ay kula dhacday isla magaalada muqdisho waxaan taasoo aan ka xusi karno markii taariikhdu ahayd 14 bishan 12aad 2015 habeenkii waxaa la soo kaciyay 7 saac habeenimo ama kowda sida loo yaqaan qofba ay u taqaano taleefanka lagu soo kaciyay waxaa la dhahay doona badda lagu dhibaateeyay oo dooyinka badda lagu xabadeeyay doon ka mid ah waxaa gaaray dhibaato xoog leh gaartay
marka niyow taariikhdu markay ahayd 12ka bishii 12aad 14keeda maalintii ahayd baan halkan ka dhaqaaqnay 4 galabnimo habeenkii waxaan tagnay meel la yiraahdo cilmicaan maqribadii halkaasaan shabaageenna soo dhigannay dabaysho si xawliyo sare ku socotay waxaan ka soo dhacnay koonfur adiga magaalada muqdisho dusheeda sare airportka halkaasna waxaan kula kulannay annagoo aan shaqo ku jirnay isla habeennimadii layrarkii wax noo shidan shabaageenna guranayno rasaasayn markii hore yani annaguna wax dakana ama wax tuhna laguma jirin iyo dareena waxaan dareen
daacadda adiga aniga xabad oo joolbaar camal ama dabajax camal macnaha hoos laguma soo dhigo kora xabad u socotay saacadda xoogay aan joogno marka halkan baad xabad ku dhacday xabadda meesha markay ku dhacday doonta waa ka boodno hadii saa u dabaalay wiilkii kale shabaab ku dhigay oo qabsaday anigana 9 saac goortay taa doon iska socoto ayaga soo qaad dabada dhaxdeere waxaad xabtay mid ay doontii soo qaadeen doontii meeshaan ugu mid iyadoo duleesho hadii ugu mid macnaha doontii banaanka la soo saaraba
annaga aan amaan helnay oo alxamdulillah ilaahay waxna gaarsiin saacado kooban annagoo shaqadii aan hawshii aan wadanay aan fududeynayno ayaan hawsheen ilaahay noo fududeeyay soo boobsiisanay
shabaagtiina ilaa waaga waa naga maqan tahay oo ilaa maalintii ay shaqo noogu dambaysay ilaa waaga adiga ilaa 7 maalmood ma shaqaysan qalabka aan ku shaqaysanayna waa naga maqan yahay doontiin halkaanayda macnaha rasu oo jeedo waxa oo ku yaal risaas
xoog leh gaartay marka subaxdii aan soo kacayna waxaan ka bilownay inaan marineska aan wargelino iyo wasaaradda kalluumaysiga aan wargelino dhibaatadaas isla magaalada muqdisho kula dhacday taasna aad aan uga xunnahay haddaan nahay mas'uuliyiinta iskaashatooyinka kalluumaysiga aad aan uga xunnahay aad aan uga xunnahay cid kasta oo wax ka qaban kartana waxaan ka codsanaynaa inay arrintan wax ka qabtaan oo zoonaha looga kalluumaysto iyo zoonaha laga ilaaliyo oo nawaaxigan la caddeeyo in la caddeeyo maxay ahaato zoonaha laga ilaaliyo dekedda iyo airportka iyo zoonaha kalluumaysiga in la kala saaro oo war cad oo bayaan cad laga soo intaan soo dhaafina in la yiraahdo dadka kalluumaystada intaasaan dhihi lahaa
The piracy problem has largely ended, and as a result, you're now starting to see the return of some of the illegal foreign fishing going on, which is an unfortunate development. And it's up to the international community, in my view, to try to ensure that that come to an end. In some cases, the foreign fishing vessels are interacting with local Somali officials, basically buying them off in order to get permission to fish in these very rich Somali waters.
With the longest coastline in mainland Africa, these fishing waters are crucial for Somalis and Somalia. Berbera, in the Republic of Somaliland, is the main port for the export of livestock to the Arabian Gulf and North Africa. These exports represent 65% of the national income of Somaliland, the breakaway state to the north of Somalia that declared independence after the fall of Siad Barre.
marka dekadanu muhiimad weyn bay ugu tahay Afrikaba marka la eego waxay ku taalaa marin biyoodka ugu dhow ruudka ay maraakiibtu marto oo 6 saacadood kaliya ayaa maraakiibta gacanka martaa 6 saacadood kaliya ay dekadan ku soo bayri kartaa 6 saacadood kaliya soo shifta garaysa markay Berbera doonayaan halka ay dekadaha kale ee mandaqada ku yaala 100 saacadood iyo in ka badan ay maraan ay u socdaan marka ay doonayaan inay qabtaan waxaanu ka shaqeynaynaa 24 hours shaqada maanta dekada laga degi maayo ama maalin walba waa sidaas waxaanu adduunyada u dhoofinaa ama aanu khaliis ama aanu carabta u dhoofinaa xoolo nool oo ari leh oo geel leh oo loo leh waxaanu u dhoofinaa xabkahan beeyada la yiraahdo waxaanu u dhoofinaa skin waxa la yiraahdo harag waxyaabahaas exportka noogu badan aanu imika dirno waana wanaagsan exportka dekada Berbera ay dirtaa
It's a bridge between Africa and the Middle East. Much of the oil that comes from the Gulf passes through Bab el-Mandeb between Djibouti and Yemen. Somalia is sitting at that gate. Everything that comes from the Suez Canal has to run by Somalia to the east. All the commodities that are brought from China and Taiwan and Korea and Singapore and Malaysia that's going to Europe runs through the doorstep of the Somalis. Okay, so geographically it's a very, very strategic location.
dhaqaalaha Somaliland waa lafdhabarta dekada Berbera waa lafdhabarta uu ku tiirsan yahay in ka badan boqolkiiba 70 ama 80 ayaa dhaqaalaha budgetka Somaliland
Berbera is one of the main reasons Somaliland has achieved a greater degree of prosperity and security than central and southern Somalia. But Somaliland has yet to receive universal international recognition, and so receives very little international aid.
haddii aanu nahay reer Somaliland amba aanu nahay regionka Hargeysa amba aanu nahay degmadan Dar es Salaam in si wanaagsan noo caawiyo oo aad si wanaagsan noo caawiyo arrimaha iyaga laga fiirsado oo la garaysa dadku ayna dhageystaan way dawladdeedu way taal daran tahay lama itiraafsana itiraafkiina iyo mudnaanta koobaadna waxa la siiyaa haddii la yiraahdo koonfur baa la siiyaa oo wax la mariyaa dhaqaalaha iyo wax kasta la bixinayo annaka wax yaro faraguudkooda hay'adda nolol soo mariyo ayaana soo gaadha sida ceel yaroo la yar qodayo iyo
So Somaliland, even though it is documented, it is admired, it is studied, but also it's not recognized.
They rebuilt that territory on their own. Nobody's recognized them. They've had very little international help. They did it from the bottom up. They devised a political system.
We don't get a penny of support, of aid from the other nations. because they say once we don't recognize you, it has to come through Somalia. And we say anything that comes from Somalia, we don't want to keep it. We can live, we can survive. We survived for 12 years. And we can survive for another 10, 20 years.
We are independent. We are independent. It doesn't matter whether they recognize us or not. We are independent. We have got our flag, we have got our army, we have got our police, we have got our offices. We are independent.
laakiin annagu kolka imika la eego xagga amniga iyo waxbarashada iyo deganaanshaha waddanka dee koonfurta la mid ma yihiin aad baan uga wanaagsannahay dowladdeedu way dhisan tahay ciidamadii baa dhisan wax kastaa dhisan amniga iyagu waa 100% ya kolka annagu saasaan uga gedisannahay laakiin waxaan u baahannahay in ama dalka nalo ama dowladda naloo ictiraafo haddii dowladdana naloo ictiraafo ya haddii la yidhaa wixii kolka dowladda naloo ictiraafaan wax walba helaynaa laakiin inta dowladda iyadu ay taa hoos joogto ya لما arrimaha iyagu ma turo baxayaan
Whatever feelings he has of the government, people accept that we must have peace. The peace we have here is people owned, not government owned, people owned. People want peace.
There is traditional mechanisms of settling clan disputes. And that's what Somaliland engaged. A law, a traditional law, blended with Islamic law. So they come out of all that, they built a bottom-up approach, they built a state and a peace.
We had elections, all the elections here. In 2002, we had local government elections. 203, president elections. 205, parliamentary elections. 2010, president elections. I was a minister in finance of the last government. We lost the election. And the other party, Kulbiya, came to power. And the president is now from Kulbiya party.
dugsiyada Schools of Tomorrow waxay ka mid yihiin dugsiyada aasaasiga ah ee waxbarashada aasaasiga bixiya runtii la aasaasay 2000 dugsiyada Schools of Tomorrow waxay lafdhabar u yihiin qayb lixaad la kaga jiraan waxbarashada Somaliland waxa aasaasay aqoonyahan reer Somaliland oo aqoontooda dhaqaalahooda iyo kartidoodaba u horay inay ummadda reer Somaliland iyo bulshooyinka Somaliland aqoon tayo leh waxbarasho tayo leh oo wanaagsan iyo tarbiyad iyo akhlaaq wanaagsan inay u aasaasaan dugsiyada markaa 2000 bay aasaasmeen dugsiga wasaaradda waxbarashada ayuu si rasmi ah toos ugu xidhan yahay manhajka waxbarashada ee Somaliland ayuu bixiyaa iyadoo supplementary dheeraada oo waxa weeyaan la siiyo ka baxsan manhajka Somaliland waxa wax lagu bixiyo dugsiga waxa weeyaan mediumkiisu waa English ayaa lagu bixiyaa waxa dugsiga hadafkiisu yahay ardayga inuu waxbarasho tayo leh oo aqoontii maadiga ahayd helo inuu tarbiyadii akhlaaqdii diiniga ahayd inuu helo isla markaana dhaqankii Soomaaliyeed iyo dhaqankeennina inuu intaba goob ku wada qaato dugsiga cid kale oo caawisa ma jirto waxa badan baa noo qorshaysan runtii waxa kamid ah dhismayaasha oo aan runtii jecel lahay qaybo badan oo imika wali qabiya inaan sii dhamaystirno oo noo qorshaysan tahay
Mohammed Yusuf Jama's optimism is encouraging, but Somalia's future is still uncertain. While there is government, Al-Shabaab still controls many parts of the country, and clan militias compete with one another for power. The civil war caused hundreds of thousands of Somalis to seek refuge in the West.
At the time I was 5 years old, we had to flee our country immediately because of the war and came to Kenya, the refugee camps in the neighboring country of Kenya. And I knew, even though at such a young age, something was going on. You could hear, shootings, and you could see all these people traveling and trying to run away too. You hear the stories of the elders telling us about there was a civil war going on, people getting killed.
In the next episode of Somalia, the Forgotten Story.
Rüschlikon, a tiny village on the outskirts of Zurich and one of the richest communities in Switzerland. Real estate prices are booming, unemployment virtually non-existent, and social problems are few and rare. Or as the mayor puts it,
Rüschlikon is a wealthy community, but they say, of course, you can be rich, but please don't show it.
One of the 5,300 villagers of Rüschlikon is Ivan Glassenberg, CEO of the commodity giant Glencore. Last year, his company went public, earning him more than $8.8 billion overnight.
The next thing was surprising because we got a phone call from the tax office of the canton. They said, please be prepared to have a bank account that can accept 360 million of Swiss francs.